Hello, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to the Coast to Coast Combat Hour. I'm your host, Matthew Hawkins, and as always, I'm joined by my co host, Ed Carbajal. Our podcast is brought to you weekly by AllAccessMMA.com. Check out AllAccessMMA.com for our video podcast, MMA news, and MMA stories. This week, we have the pleasure of welcoming Dave Manley, founder, creator of MMA Bobbleheads, MMABobblehead.com. I ran into him over the weekend at Hendo Fight Night 11 when I was out there supporting one of our guests, John Brumley, who, for fans that have been paying attention, was successful 10-second KO of the night. Uh, Dave, what's up, man? Nice chatting with you a little bit the other day. Glad you could join us.
Matt, Ed, thanks for having me on. I appreciate it. That was quite a knockout. That was awesome. Hendo's Fight Night has grown. I was there the second one, I believe. And then I hadn't gone back until this last Saturday, which was the 11th one. And what a difference, all those fight nights make, because, I mean, it felt and looked like a real event, like a really professional event. And that knockout that you just mentioned was awesome.
Yeah, he sent me some video and some pictures while he was there, and just the production of it all was. I'm surprised they don't have a bigger broadcast partner because of, the talent that's on the card and the way it looked and everything. And of course, I mean, Brumley's been on the podcast a couple of times, and a couple other guys from that gym, and it was just for us personally, it was great to see him win. But just talking to you in the few seconds we just supposed to talk before we started recording and emailing you stuff, I could just tell you're passionate about the sport of mixed martial arts. You're obviously a fan. You know a thing or two based on what you told me about the blog from your website and your picks and everything. So you got a lot of things firing off in my head. But what got you into making bobbleheads for MMA? I know they exist for all sports. So did you just see like there was no one in that space and you said, let me start doing it?
Yeah, Ed, I'm a long time fan. I've been a fan of the UFC since before they sold to Zuffa. I was talking to Matt about that since like the mid 90s. I've been a hardcore fan. I used to be a professional DJ, and at the nightclub, my very first nightclub that I worked at in like the mid 90s, 1995, 96 or whatever, all the bouncers were martial artists, and our head bouncer was not only a hardcore martial artist, but he was one of the referees back in the day of the old school UFC when it first started out. And so, as you guys know, back then in the 90s, it was an underground sport to cover, and you couldn't really watch it on TV even if you wanted to. It was very difficult to watch. But at the end of every shift, like Friday night, Saturday night, when the club was going on, we had a ton of TVs in the club. The bouncer would put the VHS tapes in, and we'd all watch the fight. Well, all the bouncers would watch fights. Everyone else would go home, the cocktail waitresses, the bartenders, whatever. But I loved it. I just absolutely fell in love. So I'd watch it with some of the bouncers. And then one of the bouncers ended up fighting in the UFC. His name was Charlie Valencia. And I think he was a bantamweight. And anyway, so that's when my love of MMA started happening. As a matter of fact, one of the cocktail waitresses started dating the vice president of the UFC at the time. She ended up marrying him and having children. So it was it was like kind of ingrained in me as a sport for over 25 years. So anyway, I've loved it and had a passion for it ever since. And about 6 years ago or so, I cleaned off a shelf in my office here, and I wanted to start an MMA memorabilia collection. And I don't know if you guys were ever familiar with the Dan Patrick Show, but it kind of looked like Matt's office there, but with all kinds of different sports, bobbleheads, pennants, trophies, memorabilia in Dan Patrick's office. And I thought, you know what? I was envisioning what Matt has in his office right now. And so I cleared off the shelf. It was completely empty, dusted it and everything. And the first thing I looked up in Google, I typed in Dan Henderson bobblehead. I just wanted to buy a Dan Henderson bobblehead and put that on my shelf. Nothing came up. So I was like, oh my God, how like Matt was saying on the top of the show, there's a bobblehead for everything, every sport, profession, occupations, janitors, gardeners have bobbleheads, whatever. Dan Henderson didn't have a bobblehead. So I was like, okay, well, I typed in Robbie Lawler bobblehead, nothing came up. And I just couldn't believe it. I went from head scratching to now I'm pissed because as a MMA fan, I'm like, what the hell is this? How?
Yeah.
So, I'm not a huge fan of this next guy, but I'm like, look, I gotta at least find a bobblehead. So I typed in Conor McGregor bobblehead, enter, nothing.
Wow.
Went to page 2, page 3, page 4, and this is when Conor was coming up in featherweight and taking over the world MMA world, and I thought to myself, if there's no Conor bobblehead, there ain't any bobblehead. So I just leaned back in my chair and I thought, can I make this? I have an art background. I have come from a family of artists, and can I make a bobblehead? And so I just went to work and spent about a year learning how to do bobbleheads and make bobbleheads and all things bobblehead. And the next thing I know, now I'm hitting up fighters to make a bobblehead of. And funny enough, a bunch of fighters said no. First guy to ever say yes to a bobblehead, Dan Henderson.
Oh,
so
wow.
Started.
So just real backtrack. Charlie Valencia. I used to watch him fight at King of the Cage when he was up and coming fighter. Are you from Southern California?
Yeah, area? I grew up probably about a mile away from Charlie. We worked together for years, and I'm from the Pasadena area.
Okay.
Born and raised in like the Pasadena area of Southern Cal. So yeah, I mean, Charlie went from the King of the Cage, and I think he went over to Strikeforce, and then eventually UFC.
Yeah, he had some WEC fights there.
WEC, yeah,
that's right. Some big fights. So okay, so we're probably roughly the same age and came up during that same era where Southern California was a super hotbed for it. So that would help explain some of your passion and much like me, how it was, you were surrounded by it eventually. If you were in the right scene, you would come across guys that, there wasn't a lot. There wasn't many, but like you said, it was the bouncers. It was the random bar dude who you could connect with to kind of talk the sport that people thought we were crazy for enjoying back then.
Yeah, I was telling one of my friends the other day who's a newer MMA fan, and when I say newer, probably within the last 5 years ago, but I was telling him how, like, for lack of better words, it was almost shameful to be a MMA fan back then. And he's like, yeah, I get it. I'm like, no, you really don't get it, man. Because if you were a hardcore MMA fan and you were like, say, at a party with other dudes your age or talking football, basketball, baseball, whatever, and they ask you what you didn't want, you almost felt dirty because you knew you were about to have to defend the sport that you love. And other people just didn't get it. It was taboo almost. So yeah, you're right. It was almost on the underground with with bouncers and guys like that. And I remember Larry Landless was the referee that I was talking about, by the way. He was the head bouncer at my club. But anyway, Larry put on a fight, a wrestling match with like fake fights and a real fight at the top of the wrestling match. And the real fight was with Tito Ortiz against some other guy, right? And I was working on a bobblehead of Tito Ortiz, and Tito and I were working together on this. And one of our first conversations I had with him, I said, hey, Tito, I just want to let you know, I go way back as an MMA fan. And I want to let you know that I go so far back that I was at a fight of yours that you had at a high school gym one time, like years ago. He's like, you were at that at Alhambra High or whatever? And I said, yeah, I was there. He's like, dude, that was my very first fight ever. And I'm like, what do you mean? He's like, I've never fought anybody before that. He's like, I drove home in my Toyota Corolla with blood all over me. I'm like, wow, I had no idea. But yeah, man. So yeah, we go back, Matt, you and I.
That's funny you mentioned Larry Landless. I actually got a text a couple days ago. A bigger podcast, I'm not going to name drop podcasts, but I get asked by some of their guys who kind of help them do their show occasionally about some of the history of some of the early stuff out here on the West Coast. And I actually got texted the other day, "Hey, we're doing a podcast about Larry Landless. Do you have any insider information?" And I really don't, other than playing cards with him in Vegas a couple times and being there at a bunch of, I was there when Baroni freaked out and all that kind of stuff. So that's crazy that you mentioned that.
Yeah, you can talk about how Larry Landless was a head bouncer at a nightclub for many, many years. He was excellent. I mean, I'm not saying like excellent, like Roadhouse excellent, where he kicked everyone's ass. Although he was just an excellent operator because this we maybe had 12, 15 bouncers on duty. It was a happening club, and he was the main security guy. So managing a lot of chaos. But anyway, Larry Landless goes back.
Yeah, it's rough work. So let me ask you, just because I mean, obviously you talked about how you got into it and how you started making them. What's the process like? Like, what materials do you use? You mentioned your art background. Is it like 3D printed and then you kind of mold it out from there, or like how does it all happen?
Yeah, that's a long answer. I don't want to bore your audience with such a long answer, but it is a multi-art process. It starts from sketching to illustrating, and then obviously digital art comes to play. There is a little bit of 3D printing with a prototype. I was showing Matt at the fights on Saturday that I'll make 1 or 2 3D prints so we can paint it a little bit differently, skin tone, hair, shading. There's a lot of different nuances that go into the prototype. And 3D prints are really expensive. They take a long time to do. So I try to boil it down as much as possible. I'll do like maximum, like maybe two renders, but and then it gets molded in resin, and then it's hand molded and then baked, and it's off from there. But each bobblehead, and from the time a fighter says yes to the time it's in like a consumer's hands, along with like the box art, like the boxes are like they're like really sturdy, and each box is different to the fighter. It's very customized to each fighter. But I was going to say each bobblehead from start to finish, because the art is so thorough, is about 9 to 12 months. Dustin Poirier took he took about 18 months. Cowboy Cerrone took about 18 months as well, just because it was very difficult. Some of the art pieces are difficult, like namely like Dustin Poirier. I had an artist redo all his tattoos. Like each tattoo, I just had a tattoo artist just redraw them for me.
Wow.
They'd be spot on. But
yeah,
that's how detailed. I mean, the way I look at this, guys, is that if no one is making the bobbleheads before I came along, I don't know if anyone's going to make bobbleheads after me if I stop doing this. And I saw what the UFC did with their bobbleheads. And this is my passion, my favorite sport in the world. I want to honor these warriors, the fighters, the best that I can, right? And that means that I want, we'll take bobbleheads and the artwork to the next level. Because generally speaking, bobbleheads are cheap, they're cartoony. You can't really tell who they are unless you read the name on the base or whatever. I wanted it to be not only almost like a more realistic version of these people, but I also wanted each bobblehead to come in a pose or in a moment that any MMA fan would instantly recognize. Dan Henderson with the H-bomb, or
I like how you got Mighty Mouse with the
Mighty Mouse with his hand up in the air, like after he celebrates. Yeah, I mean, like you don't need to know the name if you're an MMA fan. You don't need to know that Jorge's flying knee or the uppercut from Brian Ortega. How Joanna puts up that number 1 finger every time she comes out, or Miesha Tate after she beat Holly Holm and that big scream she let out. So it's unlike other bobbleheads from other sports where they're just holding a ball or a stick, and they're just standing there and they don't even really look like who they're supposed to be. I wanted to make it, where you look at them and automatically that's Chuck Liddell screaming after you win.
And you mentioned the boxes, as we brought up the website just for folks that are just listening to the audio on the MMA bobblehead.com website. I'm looking that you mentioned the box art. Even the box art is individual to the fighter too. I didn't know that until
Yeah,
right now.
yeah. One of the cool things about working with these guys is they have to be they have to want to work with me. I'm not working with managers and agents, right? I have to work with the fighters. And B, they give me the wheel on all the art, but when it comes time to make the box art and do the graphic design for the box, I tell them that you're taking the wheel from here on out. You're going to be the one driving this. So let me know how you want the box to represent you. And sometimes it'll be Chuck Liddell, I just like the icicle. I like like my shorts. Or it could be all the way to like Brian Ortega's, who the box says nothing about MMA. Brian's like, I love California. I love surfing. I love retro. And so, we sat down for like 3 hours and had tacos and just knocked out the box art, and it looks nothing like, and you wouldn't look at the box and think, oh, this is an MMA fighter. Even like this Uriah Faber one. This is my latest one. Clean. It's a famous MMA photographer named Eric Williams, and he's done iconic MMA photography. And Uriah wanted one of Eric's photos to be on his box. So it's very personalized to each fighter, and I'm glad, because then the fighter gets behind it, and the fans know that the fighters had their finger on the pulse of making this from A to Z.
Yeah, no, we lost you for a second there. You froze up, but yeah, no, I agree. And Dave, can you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, no, as somebody who purchased products from you, just to piggyback off that, they're not cheap $12 bobbleheads. So when you're putting down a nice, a fair amount of money for a piece of art, is kind of how I looked at them. I don't consider it a toy, like other bobbleheads. So when you put it in that packaging, when I'm walking out of there and you got them in my hands, and I'm going, I bought a product. This is a legit thing that I don't feel like, no one's gonna look at it and go, "Oh, you overpaid for those." They're conversation pieces. They're clean. They're heavy duty. Now you warned me about carrying them out because you package them tight and you do them. They're done. Joanna's arms aren't the same size as Chuck's. She's a 115-pound female fighter. And everything is, I like that it's a bobblehead, but their heads are essentially the normal size, as opposed to, and I don't mean to, now I felt Bellator did a good job, but like they came out with their Fedor ones, and they do have the head. They came out with a Kimbo one. They're more the traditional bobbleheads, but at the same time, when you look at the two, it's a bit of a toy compared to really a piece of art. So
right.
I gotta give
one thing
credit.
too, Matt, is that they're all numbered. They're limited. I only make a certain amount. Some fighters only make 500 of them. The number comes on the bobblehead. It comes with a certificate of authenticity. And once they're gone, that's it. I'm never making any more again. And another big difference, guys, on like the back end, behind the curtain thing that I'm personally proud of myself, is that unlike like the Bellator or the UFC bobbleheads that they make, I pay the fighters up front before I even sell one bobblehead. And I'm kind of proud of that, because I love being able to cut a check to the fighters, knowing that they're going to get paid. I know that, the Bellator and the UFC, they're big machines, and I don't know how much these guys are actually seeing from that. So it prides me to know that, I pay these guys up front. So anyone who buys my bobblehead knows that a good portion of the money went to the fighters directly.
So when you ask fighters, well, how do you go about picking who you want to make? I mean, do you just kind of, do you have favorite fighters? Is that how this is based off of? Do you go to people that you have heard are friendly towards, kind of receiving, because not every, most of the fighters are cool, but not everybody's, they feel like you're wasting your time, whether it's a podcast, whether it's a product, whether it's a shirt, anything like that. So how do you go about picking? And how did you go about getting the 12? What are you, about a dozen of them, give or take?
I'm on net in 2 weeks. I'm releasing my 18th.
Okay, there you go.
Yeah. It's it's a fine balance, Matt, when I'm choosing who to make, because it is a business at the end of the day. It's not a money-making business. I have a whole other career, full-time career that I do that I've been doing for a long time. I haven't made $1 of profit in this bobblehead business. So I don't want to lose more money. I want to keep my head above water, so to speak. So I can't just make a bobblehead of anybody who wants a bobblehead made of them. There's been a lot of fighters that have hit me up. Hey, I would love it if I was next or whatever. But, the fan in me would be like, oh, yeah, Joe Blow wants a bobblehead. I'd love to do it. I just saw him kick ass on the prelims, 2 months ago or whatever. And he may be a great fighter coming up, but I can't take that chance because they're very expensive to make. Like I said, I pay the fighters up front. They take like a year to make. So Joe Blow could go on and maybe win one and lose 2 in a row, or get knocked the F out in the next one out, or say something really stupid in the media where, he'll lose a lot of fans or whatever. I'll give you a great example of nobody that I've ever met or dealt with or ever wanted to make a bobblehead out of or whatever. But like take Paddy Pimblett, for example. This is actually a great example. Say someone came to me a month before his last fight. Remind me who he just fought.
Jared Gordon.
Yeah.
Imagine if I did a deal a month before he fought Gordon, right? Signed the paper, and then all of a sudden he fights Jared Gordon, and then he comes out and acts the way he does that interview, that loses a ton of fans, loses a lot of respect from hardcore MMA fans. I would kind of be in a little bit of in a bad spot there. Like if Paddy Pimblett faces Drew Dober or someone else that they're talking about that's real, that's in the top 15, I don't know if it's going to look good for that dude. And like all of a sudden I'm 20 grand deep in this bobblehead project. I just may lose everything. So anyway, I tried to pick fighters who are established, who everyone already knows. I don't care if they're on the backside of the career or even if they're done with their career. I'd rather work on a fighter that has, longevity to them.
Yeah, no, I mean, that makes a lot of sense. I mean, especially what you said from a couple the question before the last one about working directly with the fighter. I think that just counts for a lot, and it shows in the work that you're putting out, because like Matt held up that Fedor bobblehead. That's pretty much like the generic mold for most bobbleheads. Like they're kind of just standing straight and it's a big head. And each one that you do, like you said, it's individually molded to something that personifies it, with like the Mighty Mouse with the hand up, Derek Lewis with the throat cut thing. I think that's awesome that you talk to them first, and it just really shows in your work. From what you said, you're up to 18 now. So of the ones, I think you kind of already answered this question, but I'm going to ask the question anyway. Of all the ones you've done thus far, which one is your favorite?
Before, if you asked me that about 8 months ago, I would tell you probably my stock answer, which I treat them all like my children. It's hard to pick your favorite kid, but I definitely have I'm off the fence now. This next one that I'm releasing, I'm going to announce who it is in 2 weeks, is by far my favorite. This next one is everything I ever really imagined that I can ever possibly do, even if I couldn't even really imagine that it would get this good. The one that I'm about to release, I hate being that guy, like the big tease guy, but this next one is my favorite. But of the ones that I've released, already, like I said, they're all like my children. I have such fond memories of making them and working with the guys and talking to them, and all, these guys are fighters. They're human beings. They're 20 years old, 30 years old, legend, like, Chuck Liddell, texting these guys, talking to these guys. I'm just a hardcore fan. I'm still like, hey, I can't believe Chuck Liddell just texted me. This is unbelievable. You know what I mean? I've known Dan Henderson now for 6 years, and he texted me a couple weeks ago, hey, do you want to come down to my fight night and display some of your bobbleheads? First of all, I'm like, hell yeah. But second of all, I'm like, Dan Henderson just texted me.
Yeah.
Incredible. It's incredible. So, I mean, the whole experience is awesome. But as far as like the artwork, I just love getting my hands dirty, rolling up my sleeves and getting under the hood and seeing what could be possible. But this next one I'm going to release, guys, is incredible. I love the fact that I made an audio bobblehead. It's actually right here. It's of John McCarthy. I didn't think I was going to ever be able to make an audio bobblehead. This one, the head bobbles a little bit more, but
are you ready? Are you ready? Let's get it on.
So that's cool. It says a bunch of different things.
Let go of the fence. Don't grab the shorts.
So
That's
cool.
pretty cool.
I'm happy that I got to. Were you guys able to hear that?
Yeah. I just blew it up because I
Yeah.
just zoomed in so that people could see when you have
Yeah. So, I figured out, it took me a long time to figure out how to do an audio chip in the base with a button, get it secure. So when I ship it and, it gets handled, the speaker doesn't come loose and the little mini wires don't come loose. It took me a long time to figure it out. So I thought, I was in the works with John on possibly making a bobblehead. So I asked him, hey, would you be willing to cut me some quick little sayings that you did when you were a referee, and let's see if we can make it work. And he was all about it. So, I'm happy that I got to do.
He must have sent you 500 clips of audio.
Well, just the let's get it on by itself is great, right? I mean, that's all I needed, really. But
that's
grab
the
the shorts.
One.
Yeah. But so I'm always trying to push the envelope.
What have you approached? You can say names if you want, if it's happened. Have you approached anybody about it and basically just got turned away and they said they weren't interested?
Oh, geez, all the time. And I get reasons that you just wouldn't even believe, from all the way from they don't want a bobblehead made of themselves, which I can't believe that, all the way to and pretty much the most common is that the money is not enough for them. And trust me, I am cutting them large checks at more.
I would imagine
money.
So with the people that you've worked with already, they're notable people.
Yeah, exactly. So I have the resume, I tell these guys, call any of the guys or the management teams of any of the people that I work with. I don't care who it is. You don't have to tell me who you're calling, and I can guarantee that they'll give me a stamp of approval on working with them. But Matt, it's a shame because I've made some bobbleheads beforehand, before even asking some of these fighters, because I knew I had a contact with some of these fighters. So let's say, I'm just going to give you an example of a fighter first for just argument's sake. Let's say like Anderson Silva. Okay, this is not this. I'm just giving you an example. Anderson Silva. He's so iconic. I'm such a massive fan. Future Hall of Famer. Front kick to Vitor Belfort that everyone knows. I was there in Las Vegas. I want to make that bobblehead. I want him to say yes. I don't want to leave anything to the imagination of Anderson or his handlers when I approach it. I don't want to take a chance that I slip up in my pitch to Anderson. So you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to take 3 months out of my life and I'm going to make one badass Anderson Silva bobblehead. And instead of pitching and letting Anderson or his handlers imagine what I can do, I'm going to show them what I can do. And that should put me over the top. I have done that with maybe 4 or 5 fighters that have all said no, even with the bobblehead in front of their face, where everyone around them, including them, a lot of the times are like, that's badass. That is incredible. That's awesome. But I want $1 million. Oh,
God. Yeah.
Or they throw out a number that it's just like, like I remember talking to one of these fighters who wanted more money than they would even bring in if I sold out. And I had to do like the basic math with this person. I'd be like, dude, listen, if I'm selling them for $79.99 and I'm making 1,000, okay, let's $79.99 times 1,000. That still doesn't equate if I sold out on you to the number that you want. It's not even half.
Yeah.
He's like, well, that's the number I want.
Yeah. Oh,
and it's just like,
that's
okay.
Unfortunate. Yeah.
Okay. The people who lose, the fans.
Yeah.
Yeah, but they
fans.
lose out on a nice little check too to have a product of them made that's only going to help build their stature and their
And
awareness, and they're
it's
going to sit on people's shelves for 100 years.
yeah,
Yeah.
and the only thing they have to do is say yes is what's crazy. It's like it's not like you don't really have to do much else but say, go, yeah, you have my approval, and you're the guy doing all the work, and they're making
Yeah.
money. Like it's like all they're doing is saying agreeing to the likeness. I mean, I know like the UFC acquires like the licensing of the likeness sometimes with some of these guys or whatever, but you know the thing about like collectibles is it's as popular as there are like just bobbleheads for every sport, but it's still very niche. The people that want to have them, like Matt's a big collectibles guy. You can see it by where he records. I'm not somebody that collects much. I don't hang stuff up on the walls. So, do you ever find out like there's a lull in the interest of them? At like is there burnout? Like you said you're working on 18, but do you ever see like they just don't move because like maybe the sports in a bad place, or like during COVID, for example?
No, COVID actually was the best time of the business
Oh
for
wow.
me. But I'm gonna wrap. I feel bad wrapping that topic up on negativity. I want to wrap it up
Mhm.
on something positive, but just on that topic. I
Mhm.
hit Dustin Poirier up. I got his phone number, and I'm sorry. I got his manager's phone number, and we set up an appointment, and he saw the work on the website, and I spoke to Dustin's manager about it. I told him how much I'm offering to do the bobblehead and the whole deal or whatever. And Dustin's manager got back to me like within a couple days, and he says, "Hey, even though you do great work and we love what you've done so far, we're going to have to pass because the money just, isn't great. And, Dustin is Dustin now, and he wants
Mhm.
to, try to make, larger checks. Hey, totally understandable. That's awesome. Whatever. Okay. Good luck. And, thanks for taking my call and returning my call, whatever. About 2 or 3 days later, I get a call from Louisiana number, and I answer. Hey, it's Dustin Poirier, man. Is this Dave? Yeah, this is Dave. Hey, Dustin, nice to meet you, man. Hey, dude, I just got off the phone with, my manager, Ben. I forgot his name. My manager, and he told me about the deal. He told me about the money. And you know what? I don't care about the money's fine with me. I just want you to make a bobblehead of me. And I'm like, really? He's like, yeah, man, you make badass bobbleheads. I want
Yeah.
one myself too. And I'm like, okay, and you're cool with the with the offer? Yeah, I do whatever. It's not that much money. We get it, but that's, the bobblehead's awesome. So that's
Mhm.
how that happened. So there's fewer of those stories and more of the other ones that I gave you, but I just wanted to wrap up on a positive note on that.
So would you say that of all the ones you've made, of the 18 you've made, was there any where you were like, there's no chance they're gonna accept it, and then all of a sudden it was like, holy crap, I got Joanna, I mean on speed dial? Like what was there? What was the one that just shocked you and you were like, I can't believe that they're letting me do this?
Probably, Dan obviously, since he was my very first one, and I had already asked a bunch of fighters who I was asking fighters who were on the prelims, who never even made it to the main card, and they were saying no to me. Maybe because I had nothing to show them that I can do. There was no bobbleheads out there already. There were several fighters where I'm like, are you serious? You're saying no to me? Misha Cirkunov comes to mind. He said no. So just other fighters like that, you know what I mean? I'm not saying he's a bad guy or whatever, but just like, it's like, what, man, you're saying no? But yeah, dude, Chuck Liddell was my second fighter to ever say yes. And he's still today in 2023,
Yeah.
he's Chuck Liddell. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So when I was coming up, Matt, you know what Chuck Liddell was back then. He was John Jones and Izzy and DJ, everyone put together.
I was just gonna say if I was gonna get one, he'd be the one I want, man, because that guy was literally like the time of MMA when I was super like just fit, like when I was buying t-shirts and all that stuff, the way that Matt still does to this day. That was the guy for me. I think I have an Iceman t-shirt in my closet somewhere still.
Of
But
course
yeah.
you do, man. Because he was like the sun in our universe, right?
Yeah.
Back in the day, in the early 2000s and stuff. So anyway, when he said yes, I freaked out. First of all, he didn't even say yes at first. He invited me to dinner. He said, let's talk about it over some dinner. And I said, okay, I live 2.5 hours away from him. And I'm like, well, yeah. He's like, how about Tuesday at 7? Yeah, no problem, man.
Yeah,
Just got
I'm
my
there.
car.
Yeah.
I'm there. And then we
Yeah.
had dinner. Me and Chuck Liddell couldn't believe it. And
Yeah.
at the end, he said yes. And yeah. So, I mean, I have tons of those stories. Brian Ortega was, he was undefeated when I first started making the bobblehead out of him, and just an absolute rising star. And he's from LA, so we got along really well. And, all these, I still trip out on all these fighters that I get to interact with. It's awesome.
Yeah, it is. It is, especially when they're very friendly and cool. I know you have to get going soon, but the other thing on your website, other than selling the bobbleheads, like you said, you had we talking about the blog. You do a pretty good job of picking fights, as being that you're such a longtime fan. This weekend, I mean, you got any picks for the main event this weekend for the UFC Fight Night? Sanhagen
Yes,
and
if you go to MMABobblehead.com, I have a free blog. I break down the fights, and I do what's called hardcore history. I write the blog with a good buddy of mine, Mike Jones, and his handle on IG is Keeping It Real MMA. But he's a great MMA mind as well. But anyway, we do something called hardcore history, where we talk to you, where we write about where the fighter is from and what they've been through to get to where they're at today. And some of these fighter stories are absolutely unbelievable. They'll scratch the surface a little bit on the broadcast. And if you're not like a hardcore, you probably don't know about some of these guys' hardcore history. Like, for example, Leon Edwards' mom is 15 years older. She had him when she was 15 years old. His dad was like the gangster kingpin of the local gang that was in his neighborhood, got murdered in his early 30s or whatever. A lot of people don't know about these kinds of hardcore history items. So anyway, we talk about the fight, we talk about the hardcore history of the fighter, and then I make my pick for the fights. I'm leaning towards Marlon Vera at plus 150. He is such an absolute junkyard dog. I think he might be too much for Corey Sandhagen, although Corey Sandhagen's technical striking is just level 10. I just don't know if he's gonna. I'm thinking that Chito Vera is gonna give him so much pressure that it might take the leg strikes out of the equation. And if you're taking leg strikes and spinny shit away from Corey Sandhagen, I think just the tenacity of Marlon Vera, especially at plus money, plus 150, might get you there. One thing that I really like on when you're betting underdogs, that even though the underdog may lose, Marlon Vera may lose, you know what you're buying when you lay your money down on a fighter like that. For example, you don't necessarily know what you're getting when you lay your money down on Ciryl Gane against John Jones. There's a big question mark. So you don't know if you're getting good value when they pull the curtain back on what you get on fight night. You know exactly what you're going to get with Marlon Chito Vera on Saturday against Corey Sandhagen. That's for sure. So I'm going to take the plus money against Sandhagen.
I agree with that.
Yeah, I like it. I'm pulling for Vera. I think it's going to be an outstanding fight. One of the better fight night main events. Really, I mean, we get them occasionally, but this is one that's pay-per-view worthy fight itself, not necessarily the card, but the fight.
Yeah.
So
I'm looking for a come out party with Macy Barber too. I think that she's a heavy favorite, but I think that this might be one of her signature fights, and where it's really going to put her on the map, and people are going to really start talking about her as a possible top 5 or title contenders coming up soon.
Yeah, she had a terrible knee injury, and she ran into Roxanne Modafferi at a time when Roxanne was on her way out the door, but kind of had a final showcase fight there. So man, it's been great having you. I know you're MMA Bobblehead on Instagram. I believe you're that on Twitter. I don't know how active you are on Twitter, but is there any other places? Do you have your Facebook page? Do you have your website, MMABobblehead.com? Anything else, anywhere else that your product goes through, or you'd want to lead people to?
Yeah, I'm most active on Instagram. MMA Bobblehead is kind of my handle everywhere, but hop on my newsletter. Also on when you sign up for the newsletter, I send out a lot of discount codes and specials and things like that I just don't mention publicly unless you're on the newsletter. So yeah, the blog's always fun to get the hardcore history and the picks and discount codes and whatnot at MMABobblehead.com.
You also do. We didn't get into it, but you do like Christmas ornaments,
Oh yeah.
which are actually pretty hilarious. I mean, you wanted to, and they're they're cheaper. So if you were looking for something just to kind of, it's not a gag gift because they're so awesome, but at the same time, if you walked into somebody's house on Christmas and you see a bloody Dustin
Yeah.
Poirier hanging from their tree, it definitely is a little bit of a laugh. So
You're a true MMA fan if you have a Derek
Yeah.
Lewis pounding his chest on your Christmas tree.
Yeah, for sure.
there you go.
100%.
All right. Well, fans can check out the show at Combat Hour on Twitter, Coast to Coast Combat Hour on Instagram. Follow me, Matthew Hawkins, at MMA Hawk 21 on Twitter and Instagram. Follow Ed at Carbazol on Twitter, Carbeerzol on Instagram, Old Head Carb on Twitch. And as always, again, our show is brought to you by All Access MMA. Check out allaccessmma.com for our video podcast. Dave, great talking to you. Love that you were such a huge fan. Love that you have a passion behind this business. You're one of the guys that now after talking to you, you're going to help keep this crazy sport, alive. No matter what happens, no matter what controversies, the fact that there's a good guy helping put out a product that, like I said, will sit on people's shelves and help remind them of the good old days of MMA and hopefully continue throughout the future. So we really appreciate your time.
Thanks, guys. It was a pleasure being on the show, and thanks for having me. Appreciate it.
Thank you for listening, and good night, everyone.